Hello, how are folks doing? So I don't like the term mistress of ceremony or masters of ceremony. I'm not quite sure. I should have looked up where that originated, but it always seems so not to speak to the occasion. I want to say hello. How is everyone doing? And I want to say we're gathered here. We're good? This is being live streamed, I'm told. Devastation has hit Jamaica. It might not have hit us in Kingston, although I think many of us suffered some tree loss and some leaves loss and all of those kinds of things. And I just want to acknowledge that. I think it's important. I know that many of my students, I'm Opal Palmer-Adisa, also known as Professor Opal Palmer-Adisa, and I know that many of my students come from areas in the West that have been impacted, and it has been tremendously devastating. And it also has been devastating to me, not because I've been severely impacted, but are you guys hearing me? Okay, not because I've been directly impacted, but I'm impacted by what I see and what I witness and the devastation that is part of Jamaica. And I too feel traumatized. And so I just want us to take a few seconds to breathe that in, because I know many of us have, well, maybe some of you have visited the areas, many of you might have relatives in those areas, and it's going to take a while for us to recover from what has happened. And it's a wake-up call in many ways. So I just invite you to breathe deeply and just acknowledge how you're feeling right at this moment. And we also certainly want to send love and support spiritually, emotionally, and of course financially when we can, to respective people throughout the island who are challenged. One of the things that I've done, and I'm going to use this platform to invite other people to do the same thing, is I've adopted a school, Chester Castle in Hanover, that not only lost its roof, but it's adjacent to a river, and the river washed away the bridge and the encasement so that it's not safe for students to attend. And there are many such schools in St. Anne, in Westmoreland, all over, that really need your support. And so I invite you to identify a school and adopt it, whatever that might look like for you. For me, one of the things I'm organizing is to make sure the 186 students have loaded backpacks before the year is end, and to get support to make sure that the school is safe. So it looks like different things for all of you, but I do invite you to think about that. And to do that, the government and the ministry is doing its part, but it's going to take all of us to do our part. So that's my little spiel, or my big spiel. I don't want to diminish what it is and what is needed, and to really encourage each of you to join in. But this is a wonderful occasion, and I'm really grateful that I'm here and I've been asked to MC the occasion. It's the 18th Edward Baugh Lecture, and I had the pleasure of knowing Eddie Baugh, and what a tremendous human being and poet and contributor to this campus that he was. And so it's important that we honor those memories and people who have contributed to the landscape of literature for us in this beautiful place of Jamaica that has produced and continues to produce tremendous writers. So I am going to invite the chair of the department, Dr. Lisa Tomlinson, to come and extend greetings to all of you. But again, I want to say welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We have many distinguished faculty and administrators, and I want to say welcome to them and thank you for being here. But I particularly want to say thank you and welcome to Mrs. Baugh. So, yes, Dr. Lisa Tomlinson.
Thanks, Opal. I didn't adopt a school, but I ended up with a kitty that I suspect is displaced from the hurricane that I've been caring for. I just thought I would throw that out just to lighten up the occasion. I know we're going through a rough time, so I do have a little kitty for a little short time now. Alrighty, so Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Dr. Dion Edward Kerr, members of the Department of Literatures in English, and faculty members, distinguished guest, Mrs. Sheila Baugh, wife of the late Professor Emeritus Edward Baugh. Our guest speaker for the 18th Annual Distinguished Edward Baugh Lecture, Dr. Kai Miller, special invited guest here on campus, and our virtual audience joining us from around the world, welcome. It's my great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all of you, our face-to-face audience, as we gather for the 18th Annual Distinguished Edward Baugh Lecture. It's a true honor to gather once again in celebration of one of Jamaica's most distinguished literary scholars, poets, and cultural voices. This lecture series stands not only as a tribute to Professor Baugh's enduring contribution to Caribbean literature, but also as a reminder of the responsibility we share in keeping our literary and cultural legacy vibrant, relevant, and alive. This evening, we do more than just honor his remarkable body of work. We celebrate the legacy of Prof. Baugh's that he has forged, the pathways he's opened, and the intellectual generosity he embodied. As a professor, he stirred minds, encouraging generations to discover and embrace their own voices within the rhythm or the rich rhythms of Caribbean culture. His mastery in bridging creativity and critical thoughts continues to resonate across generations, enriching Caribbean literature with both depth and imagination, which we'll witness tonight from our poets, right? So we have Letitia, MPhil student and artist and poet, who will show that, generation passing down, and of course, our special guest, Kai Miller. Before we move to the heart of this evening's program, I must share a small moment of coincidence, one that carries just enough humor to remind us that Caribbean life is always a mix of art, culture, and unexpected prophecy. The title of our guest speaker's lecture, The Prophesying John Crow, was sent to me weeks before Hurricane Melissa swept across the island. Weeks, literally. At that time, none of us could have imagined that the nation would soon be calling on actual John Crows to help clean up what the storm left behind. Little did Kai Miller, who said, I'm not sure, I don't, because he was saying, I don't think I'll be changing it, I might. But little did he know that his lecture title would become an uncanny forecast of headlines to come. Perhaps this is what happens when literature keeps an eye on the world too close. It is therefore a pleasure and a privilege to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Kai Miller, who continues in the rich tradition shaped by Professor Baugh, advancing conversations that challenge, inspire, and extend the horizons of Caribbean literary studies. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your commitment our virtual audience and our audience face to face, your commitment to sustaining the dynamic spirit of our literature. There's this idea that literature does not have that full meaning, but every year we see that there's that crave for literature. Let us look forward to an evening of reflection and cultural celebration. Thank you.
Sorry, is it possible to check the sound, please?
Hi, sorry. We did check the sound. Unfortunately, it's not the microphone, but it is the speaker. So we can't get, yeah. So they have to get the whole new tech to come in and fix it.
How are people hearing? They're not hearing?
No, they are hearing. It's just that on that side, it's a bit garbled because of the speaker.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so we could probably, I probably could use this.
No, he has a lapel mic.
Yes, okay.
Oh, so this is, okay.
Okay.
So I want to apologize for the sound and for those who are not hearing as well as you should because of the speakers. We will continue and we will have Letitia Willocks who will come forth and read a poem.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocols concerned, I'm going to be reading two poems. Hello. I'm going to be reading two poems today, one from Dr. Baugh's work and one that I wrote a couple years ago. Starting with my poem, it's called Black. Black, insecurity, talk low, cause them afraid away. Wait, member say we have the trait for make all away. Take the bait and put up with it. Take the fate, lose your history. Then them say, them own all away. Pan the boat, them chain all away. Africa, don't belong to we. Start a war, then thief up the thing. Sell your friend, then go pan your knee. Serve a man where we never see. Black, right now you see, open up space for all away. One drop, that is all you need. Fake tan or dreadlocks or weed. Fake butt, learn for twerk with we. All this time, still a thief with things. Meanwhile, we don't like what we see. When the glass, it look back pan we. Now them sell all the bleach we need while them buy with sun, sand and beach. But John know, me tired you see. Every day is a fight for we. Help me, sir, not imprison me. Father gone, him never help to grow me. But don't fret, I know you me mean. I know you do these things to me. That night, me come home, you see, reach me door and me have me key. That man take me dignity and black. That was all me see. So this one is kind of interesting. When I was coming, I selected this one, Sometimes in the Middle of the Story, by Dr. Edward Baugh. And there are two words in it that I said, you know, so I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce them word there. So I decided not to read this poem. So I came and I asked my good friend to select a poem for me. And this is the poem, same poem he sent to me. So, Prophecy. It's called Sometimes in the Middle of the Story for the Drowned Africans of the Middle Passage. Sometimes in the middle of the story, something moves outside the house, like it could be the wind, but it's not the wind, and the storyteller hesitates so slight you hardly notice it, and the children hold their breath and look at one another. The old people say it's Toussaint passing on his gray horse, Belargent, moving faster than Bacra master timepiece, know to measure. Briefing the captain, setting science and strategy to trap the emperor. But also that sound had something in it of deep water, salt water, Had ocean the sleep sigh of a drowned African turning in his sleep on the ocean floor? And Tucson horse was coming from far, his tail trailing the swish of the sea from sweet secret rendezvous, from councils of war with those who never completed the journey. And we below the deck heard only the muffled thud of scuffling feet, could only guess the quick, fierce tussle, the stifled gasp, the barrel chest bursting, the bubbles rising and breaking, the blue crossing over. But their souls shuttled still, the forest paths of ocean connecting us still, the current unbroken, the circuits kept open, the tireless messengers, the ebony princes of your lost Atlantis, a power of black men rising from the sea.
Thank you, Letitia. A power of black men rising from the sea. And we're constantly rising. And you know, one of the things that has been said over and over since Hurricane Melissa is our resilience. And it's true, Jamaica and Talawa and them resilient, but Jamaica is also traumatized. And we haven't taken time to deal with that trauma. And consequently, I feel many times when we interact with each other in a way that's harsh and not so kind, because there's so much pain that we have not dealt with. One of the best things, did I say for us to thank Letitia for her poem and her reading of Eddie Baugh's poem? Okay. Before I introduce Kai, Kai writes a lot about what Jamaicans say and the way they say things. And I've been collecting phrases that I've seen on the internet of Jamaicans who've been interviewed. And one man, I haven't come up with the poem yet, but when the reporter said to him, "What happened?" Him said, "The roof lift off like it's plane." And I have to say to myself, "Me not buy no ticket, so when me have fly?" And there are all of these in the midst of this tragedy, these amazing idioms and the way in which Jamaicans describe things, their drama, and you can't help but laugh at some of it because it's really quite funny. Okay, so, all of you here are educated, intellectual people, and you know Kai's bio, or you can go look it up on the internet. And so my introduction, while it does include some of the traditional stuff, really, I don't usually like those things. So this is called What Things Have You Withheld? Introducing Kai Miller. So I'm delighted and a tiny bit mischievous, because Kai brings out the mischief in me, I think in many people, to introduce someone whose writing has a habit of sneaking up on you, pinching you in the side when you least expected, then letting go only once you realize you've been moved. Maybe laughing, maybe crying, maybe both. That someone is Kai Miller. Did I mention that he's one of us? He studied at Mona in the Department of Literatures and English, though he left before graduating. Kai is a Jamaican poet, novelist, essayist, and creative writing professor with a voice so alive it makes the page breathe. In his poems, novels, and essay, he refuses quiet. He traffics in truth, personal, political, painful, hopeful. His work dives into bodies, memory, identity, place, and emerges unflinchingly human, raw, yet intact. If you have read his essays in Things I Have Withheld, you will know what I mean. Pieces like There Are Truths Hidden in Our Bodies or The Boys at the Harbor don't just tell stories, they excavate histories, traumas, loves, silences. Kai doesn't walk to the edge, he leaps. And sometimes, with perfect timing, he will crack you up just before the sting swells your arms and pains. I know him not only as the brilliant writer, but as a generous collaborator and a friend. I remember asking him to write an essay for our tribute 100 Voices for Miss Lou. What he delivered, Amazing Grace, resonated deeply, a piece in which he allowed himself to truly claim his Jamaicanness, to embrace Miss Lou's spirit, and to weave together memory, identity, and love. He's also simply funny. A raised eyebrow, a paused breath, a Jamaican yaman, and suddenly a poem or story lands with laughter, then with weight. That's part of his magic. Some of Kai's awards and honors: in 2014, he won the prestigious Forward Prize for Poetry for his collection, The Cartographer Tries to Map a Way to Zion. And just that title alone is so amazing. Judges praised its distinctive voice, noting how it defies expectations by weaving Jamaican rhythm with lyrical depth. In 2016, his novel Augustown won the OCM Booker Prize for Literature. And in 2018, he received the Anthony Saga Caribbean Award for Excellence in Arts and Letters and was elected to the Royal Society of Literature under its 40 Under 40 initiative. His essay collection, Things I Have Withheld, which if you haven't read it, I really urge you to, it's quite wonderful, was shortlisted for the prominent Clifford Prize for Nonfiction. And that's just a few highlights. What that shows is Kai isn't only gifted, his voice has been heard, honored, and held up by the literary world. In a review of Things I Have Withheld, one critic called the collection a masterful poetic exploration of body and voice. They praised how Kai uses his dual life, Caribbean, diasporic, intimate, to interrogate race, sexuality, identity, and the weight of silence. And this, for me, is a really important aspect of his work. The review observed that reading him is an act of epiphany. Another reviewer described the essay as exquisitely vulnerable, combining Jamaican heritage, global travels, and lived experience as a black queer man in the diaspora. They highlighted how Kai's writing produced a magnificent examination of race, sexuality, and identity, often giving voice to stories that are too often withheld. In short, critics say that with Kai's essays, stories, and novels, you don't just read, you feel, reflect, and begin to understand lives lived at the intersection of culture, history, body, sexual identity, and longing. So tonight, we have the gift of hearing from someone whose pen doesn't settle for comfort, whose laughter, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, echoes truth many of us carry but seldom voice. Please join me with warmth and laughter and maybe a tissue or so to welcome the brilliant Kai Miller.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? No? No? I think this might work. Yeah. And I hope this works a little differently from that mic. It's better. Yeah. All right. Lisa, turn off the other mic. All right, so Lisa and Whitney, just thanks for setting this up, and Sheila, so good to see you, thanks. I even wrote out the preamble because I don't want to waffle because this might be long. So this is the preamble. So when I first thought I would give this lecture, I thought of one of my early encounters with Eddie Baugh. My career as a writer started here in Jamaica, and it was in Wayne Brown's literary supplement in the Sunday Observer where I and many other Jamaican writers first began to publish regularly. Out of that came the Observer Literary Awards, which is the scene of this memory. Eddie was asked to give the charging speech, but there was some fuss going on behind the background. Apparently unknown to some of the organizers, 2 ministers of government had shown up, which completely upended the order of protocol. Someone was very anxious that the 2 dignitaries be properly acknowledged and needed to make sure that Eddie knew. I know Baugh would never have used these words, but the mildly annoyed wave of his hand clearly said, "Come on, I got this." He climbed up to the podium and started grandly. The Honorable Colin Campbell, Minister of Transport, Dr. the Honorable Omar Davis, Minister of Finance, and then he paused, and then he leaned into the mic and all but purred, "To what do we owe such honor?" Omar Davis immediately roared with laughter, permitting everyone else to do so as well. And it highlighted for me one of the most wonderful things about Eddie, what an honor it was to be worth his wit. As part of the project I'm writing now, I've been thinking about our national heroes. As a literature person, for me, the hero is simply the lead character in a story. So national heroes must be those who play lead roles in the national story. What then, I wondered, are the stories we want to tell about ourselves? Who stars in those stories, and do the heroes we have now, in fact, tell the story we want to tell? I had planned to invoke them one by one, from the first hero, the Right Honorable Marcus Garvey, to the 7th, the Right Honorable Samuel Sharp, and pose the question, to what do we owe the honor? I thought it a clever way to both honor Eddie and take you into this strange project, Reflections on Storytelling. The lecture I will give in a minute is from that project, but it takes you back to the beginning of it, and so doesn't quite honor Eddie in the way that I had planned. So with your indulgence, before I begin that lecture, I would like to read a poem for Eddie. And it is called Chancellor I Present, for Professor Eddie Baugh, Public Orator of the University of the West Indies, Mona. Chancellor, here at the foot of the hill, I acknowledge the difficulty of the climb. For how does one eulogize the eulogist? How do we song the loss of song? Sir, do you remember those proud and weeping mothers who would make the journey from out of town, come to this plantation town campus just to see Punky our son in hat and gown, announced on stage not as Punky our son, but by government names even these mothers had forgotten? And so committed were they to this one duty, the cheering on of the come good after so much heartache picnic, they too were surprised to find themselves caught up in the sonorous heights of Eddie Baugh's citations, risen first to their feet and then higher and higher and higher up into the mournful pink of a Mona sky. And how the next year they were back with neither chick nor child in the parade of graduates, but just to hear the sweet man with the sweet words call the roll of our people's greatness, like deep calling to deep, or like mountain speaking of mountain. It is 1985, and all 6'5" of the cricketer Clive Lloyd is folded into a cheap metal chair. It is Baugh's first outing, and he approaches the podium with the quiet dignity of a batsman approaching crease. His face turned towards you, Sir Chancellor, his hand stretched towards Clive. He begins, I speak now of heroes. Chancellor, as do I. Chancellor, I present the self-confessed MAGA footboy This was his way to imagine himself small in our eyes. Though in our eyes he was mountain, he was hero, he was the calling deep. Chancellor, with all due respect to your authority, I now invoke ours and call the name of him who would not call his own. Edward Alston Cecil Baugh, my song cannot fully tune the loss. So just a brief description of this project. I see it as a kind of lyrical or poetic documentary. Sometimes the camera is pulled so far back. You'll see that in a couple sections called A Place Above the Story. They might not connect to this, but I've left them in there because that is part of it. And that runs through the entire project. And though individually what they observe might be quite obvious, I hope it builds into something that approaches some kind of profundity even. But when the camera does zoom in, what I am thinking about are Caribbean traditions of the masquerade, which, as we know in Jamaica, would be Jankuno. But this is the first part of that project, and it is called the Prophesying Jankuno. I have images running in the background. They're not going to always connect. It will fall out of time, but it will loop back. Because if you're as distracted as me to sit down and listen to one person for 45 minutes, I need visual distraction. So when you're bored, you can just look up. Huh? The Prophesying Jankro, Part 1, the Prophesying Jankro. This begins with a jankro, a turkey vulture, to use its most widely common name. The jankro is perched atop a coffin, the coffin held in a three-wheeled gurney. It is a story I had heard often, except it never felt I had heard the entire story, just this one dark, shining fragment of it. A little piece of a Jamaican ghost story, a duppy story, to use its most locally common name. The story goes like this. A self-propelled coffin travels through the towns of Jamaica, and it causes pandemonium. There is nothing spectacular about the coffin itself. It is made of something simple, something cheap, like plywood. Its simplicity makes it all the more terrifying. A casket of fine wood and ornate craft would have been a death so outside the financial possibilities of the townsfolk, they would never have assumed such a luxurious crate was intended for them. A plywood coffin, however, was a coffin for just about anyone. For the pauper, his just due, and for the prince, his ultimate humiliation. So this casket in search of its content is the cause of much terror to all who are so unlucky as to witness it. If the coffin itself, outside of its mysterious abilities of movement, is not spectacular, the three great birds that ride atop it certainly are. Jankras. They are haunting spectacles with their bald red heads, their black pebble eyes, their ferocious hooked beaks, and their country parson-looking plumes. A bird so perfectly shaped by evolution to now be the ultimate scavenger, the ideal consumer of the dead. At each place that the coffin stops, people faint, whether through some kind of contact with a ghostly phenomenon or from simple nervous overwhelm. But for those made of sterner stuff, those able to stand upright and seemingly unbothered in the presence of such dark obeah, they witness the moment when the smallest of the jankras steps forward. The vulture clears its throat, and with surprising politeness, not at all the rattling squawk of death one might have expected from a carrion eater, asks, "Has anyone seen Mr. Brown?" This is the entire story as I have heard it. It is certainly as much as Bob Marley and the Wailers narrate in their 1971 song, "Who is Mr. Brown?", latterly shortened to simply Mr. Brown, a song which, given Marley's stature, has easily become the most citable source for this particular nugget of Jamaican folklore. Still, it always seemed to me that parts of the story were missing. Its beginning, it's full of context, its build-up, its what and its why and its who. Even Bob Marley strumming folklore into song seems not to have the entire picture. The falsetted vocables of Bunny Wailer's ooh at first just adds to the sonic landscape of haunting, but then surprisingly resolves into the word who. Who, Peter Tosh jumps in to supply the rest of the question, is Mr. Brown? And then Bob Marley throws out wild suggestions. A clown riding through town in a coffin? The song is caught in its own loop, unable to find an answer to the question it poses. Who the hell is Mr. Brown? There is an urgency, never explicit but certainly implied, to answer the question. The politeness of the jonquil does not hide her menace, nor does the interrogative form of the sentence, a simple question, hide its imperative aggression. The listener is not fooled. This is a prophecy in disguise. Mr. Brown is both specific and frustratingly ambiguous. It is a name almost but not quite common enough to be every man, like John Doe or Joe Schmo or Tom, Dick and Harry. Mr. Brown, with all his subtle signifying of racial complexity, inches every generation closer to the category of the universal. Hurrah for Mr. John Brown and his expanding kingdom. Oh, for every man and woman who is suddenly brightened by his symbolic light. And this was the problem. Given Jamaica's complex history, there are reasonable contexts in which Mr. Brown could mean just about anyone. So was it a name or was it a riddle? Has anyone seen Mr. Brown? Asks the jonquil. We can almost imagine her head tipped to the side, a smile forming. The indirect question hides a more direct question. Are you Mr. Brown? Which in turn hides a chillingly cold threat. If you are Mr. Brown, then I am here for you. The urgency to answer is the urgency to clear one's own name. If we solve the riddle, who is Mr. Brown, then and only then might we say for sure the prophecy does not apply to us. In Marley's plaintive cry, I want to know who is Mr. Brown, we should hear underneath a more vulnerable plea. Please, let Mr. Brown not be me. Not yet. Still, the perfect logic and construction of the jonquil's prophecy means that all of us eventually will become Mr. Brown. The prophecy can only be delayed. It cannot be shrugged off completely. Released as a single on January 23, 1971, unattached to any larger album project, Who is Mr. Brown is one of the early reggae hits for Bob Marley and the Wailers, musically caught between the bebopping ska sound of the 60s and the more contemplative sounds of reggae and Rastafari that would dominate the 70s. The narrative of the song, this self-propelled coffin traveling around the island and causing great disturbances, seems to describe an island caught between its own epochs. Even as the gritty and violent truth of urban poverty begins to assert itself in the form of guns, gullies, gangs, and an ever-expanding acreage of zinc and concrete, is even as the people try to soften this brutality with folklore. Better yet, it was a kind of folklore with enough of its own claws and darkness to stand up to the city's muscle, or worse, the city's ambivalence to old-time fables. Pay attention to the tale of the jonquil on the coffin, and you might notice a tension between the story's content and its setting. With its talking animals and occult apparitions, there is a strong folk sensibility here. Yet, it refuses its more obvious landscapes. This is not taking place in the sleepy village, nor in some rural pasture, nor on the cane fields of plantation slavery, all more stereotypical settings for duppy stories. This jonquil-mounted coffin has distinctly cityfied tastes. Or perhaps it is Mr. Brown's taste. Yes, it is Mr. Brown who has moved to the city, and so the coffin must follow him there. In any case, whether it be from Mandeville or to Sligoville, as Marley sings it, as the coffin travels the lengths and breadths of Jamaica, it is being curiously pulled, like much of the population at the time, towards the urban centers. And perhaps if I had considered this particular tension before, this duppy story pulled between the modern and the folk, something would have occurred to me, namely that this wasn't folklore at all. It didn't even belong to the category of folklore we call urban legend. Not yet. Not then. Not when Bob Marley and the Wailers sang about it in January of 1971. At that time, it was simply news reportage. They were singing about a series of incidents that had occurred across the island less than 3 months before, on October 28th, 1970. This is that other. A place above the story. Before we continue, let us establish this. A place outside the slow plod of narrative, a retreat if you will, a space you may return to from time to time and consider things differently, but this time from above. Come then, observe the human. Keep enough distance that you are free of the hypnotizing pull of their stories. Do not be drawn in, not yet. Just observe them. And this particular species of humans, the Homo sapiens. There have been others, Homo habilis, Homo naledi, Homo luzonensis, the pygmy-sized Homo floresiensis. In the knowable past of this planet, at least 21 species of mankind have existed, each one living out their allotted 400,000, 300,000, 1 million years before slipping softly into extinction. This lot, they are only the most recent of the humans, but as well, they are the only humans. They are what is called a monotypic taxon, like the aardvark. They stand alone, the only example of their species. Outside narrative, the human is of little consequence. Their entire existence is but a tiny dot on a thick line that runs 1,000,000 miles. They, the Homo sapiens, have been around for some 200,000 years or so, but have only really risen to prominence in the last 10,000, in this interglacial period, this brief pause to Earth's long and ongoing ice age. But most humans do not think of time in this grand scale. In many of their religions, the Earth and the universe did not even exist 10,000 years ago, and will not exist 10,000 years in the future, their narratives having long wrapped up by then. Outside of narrative, the human is of little consequence. But inside story, they are everything. They are the very epicenter of creation. The world unfolds from their feet. The earth and the universe are made for their delight and their domination. Inside story, the human is important and has important things to do. There is always urgency, even panic. The clock draining to its final seconds. Will there be enough time to solve the mystery, to expose the lie, to defuse the bomb, to make amends, to secure a great love, or else rekindle one, or else secure one's long-deserved comeuppance? In their stories, everything is at stake. The meaning of life, the universe and its very survival, whether comic or tragic, whether whimsical or philosophical, it is human to live one's life as if it were a story. 2. October 28th, 1970. This is what the archives do not say, nor do they have to. That October 28th, 1970 in Jamaica began in an unremarkable way. The fact that the archives make no remark at all is proof enough to me of the morning's unremarkableness. There was no hurricane on the horizon, no election about to be called, no tragic death the night before that had rattled the island. It seemed to have been just an ordinary morning. pan out to the wider Americas and things were afoot. It was the beginning of the 70s. America's wild trio of counterculture icons of the previous decade, Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, and Janis Joplin, were all facing their final tragic trials. In September, Hendrix had died of a drug-related overdose. In early October, Janis Joplin had joined him, also a drug-related overdose. All eyes now on Jim Morrison, himself just a year younger than Hendrix and Joplin, and who had just recently been delivered a guilty verdict in a Florida court on the charge of obscenity. But on the morning of October 28, 1970, it was baby Huey, an interesting but less central figure who would die tragically, and for a small moment threatened to reconfigure the trinity of icons, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and baby Huey? Baby Huey, always a day late and $1 short. A successful touring act, he and his band, the Babysitters, had never actually recorded an album, not until that very year, 1970. But now, Huey had managed to die months before the actual release of his influential album. And even then, upon its release, the full weight of its import would not be felt for years. How it telegraphed the beginnings of a whole new sound and genre, hip-hop. The ultimate dark comedy of Huey's death was that he was not so much a day late as he was a year early. Overdosing at the age of 26, he would not even be allowed entry into the so-called 27 Club that Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin had started, that macabre imagined collection of brilliant but tragic musicians who overdosed and died at the age of 27, a group that would indeed include Jim Morrison, who had the patience to put off his death until 1971, and later still Kurt Cobain, and later still Amy Winehouse. Baby Huey's death on October 28, 1970 was noted, but it did not shake the world. Further scurrying about through the archives does, however, reveal one interesting tidbit concerning this particular day in Jamaica. For it was on October 28, 1970, that George Williams was arrested, scraped off the Kingston streets, and charged with the murder of one Ian Lowry. Still, it would take all of 50 years for this particular story to ripen and be picked up by local and international media. At the time, there was little doubt in the eyes of the police that George Williams had in fact done the deed for which he was accused. But his strange mumbling made it unclear if he was in a state to comport himself in a formal trial. To put it plainly, him did mad. A jury declared him unfit and he was transferred to Bellevue, the mental hospital. From Bellevue he escaped, though that word escape implies careful plotting and presence of mind. George Williams had no presence of mind. It would be more accurate to say George Williams wandered out from the asylum and back into the familiar streets of Kingston. The taste of freedom would be brief. He was recaptured and this time placed in the decidedly less humane St. Catherine Adult Correctional Center, Spanish Town Prison, to use its most locally common name. Between 1972 and 1978, Williams was occasionally hauled out from his cell and brought before a judge. In the courtroom, he would mumble incoherently once again. They would declare him unfit once again, and he would be returned to prison all over again. Records say after May 25, 1978, these excursions stopped altogether. Seemed easier to just forget about Williams. And he really was forgotten for 42 years until the year of COVID arrived, and a fellow prisoner, 81-year-old Noel Chambers, similarly insane, similarly unfit, similarly Rasta, and similarly held for decades at the pleasure of the Governor General, collapsed and died in his cell, his skeletal body teeming with whole colonies of feeding insects. Chambers' death shone a light on the squalor that festers in an overcrowded Jamaican prison and the ill health suffered by their inmates. It was this small bit of light that at last illuminated the case of George Williams. In July of 2020, Williams was released from prison. In July of 2025, he won a lawsuit brought against the Jamaican government by his family on his behalf. He would be awarded over $120 million, and his picture, his name, and his tragic story would appear on the front pages of both national newspapers, not to mention a variety of human rights publications. Now an elderly Rasta man, his soft, unfocused eyes, almost childlike, seem even more poignant a rebuke of an uncaring nation state than any sharp and glowering stare could be. But on that Wednesday, back in 1970, the media was not interested in George Williams. There was no story about his arrest the following day. No one was interested in the victim, Ian Lowry, who really was deceased. Nor were they interested in the too soon death of baby Huey over in America. The nation was transfixed by another death, one that might not even have occurred yet, one that was only prophesied by a disturbingly polite John Crow. 3. And the crows danced upon the coffin. Dismissed even in the moment of its occurrence as a case of mass psychogenic illness, mass hysteria to use its most widely common name, it is most likely that the true source of the story of the John Crow will always remain unknown. Conspiracy theories abounded after the fact, including that it was all a social experiment conducted by the University of the West Indies to see how fast a rumor could travel. As little proof exists to substantiate that claim as there exists to substantiate the fact of the coffin, the theory remains interesting, springing as it seems to have sprung from the imagination of the educated class, even as they responded to the story of the John Crow with a kind of tut-tut dismissal and incredulity, that word, at the capacity of the common laborer to believe such tall tales, was even as they were spinning their own. In any case, the very serious island-wide disturbances caused by the John Crow and its coffin were real, even if the bird and its dark chariot were not. In Spanish Town, where the rumor started, traffic on the main thoroughfare came to a complete stop. Scores of people were pouring into the old capital. When the sidewalks were full, people felt comfortable to continue along in the streets, weaving in and out of the vehicular traffic around them. To make it worse, the crowd was not moving in one direction. People were running about with seeming aimlessness, trying to spot the magical coffin. In the early telling and spreading of the rumor, it seems one specific and compelling detail was used to sell the entire story. It was being whispered that a young and brave police officer had encountered the coffin early in the morning and naturally had pulled his service weapon. He fired a shot, but it did not go as expected. It was the lawman own self who collapsed as if the bullet had exited its chamber in the wrong direction. Fallen now and comatose by obeah, it was said that the police officer had since been rushed to the Spanish Town Hospital, where he remained in critical condition. Now, on top of the everyday heart attacks, strokes, car crashes, gunshot, and stabbing wounds, hospital staff had to deal with a suddenly curious and overly compassionate public stopping by to inquire as to the health of the young officer, or else jamming up the switchboard, calling to ask if anyone had been admitted under the name Constable or maybe Corporal Brown. In fact, the Spanish Town police station had to issue a statement insisting that nothing of the sort had happened, that there had been no shooting incident that morning involving an officer and a John Crow. But it was too late. The story was already flying. The first jump seems to have been to Sligoville, a mere 10 miles away from Spanish Town. From there, it seems to have jumped parishes, skipping over Clarendon and landing in Manchester. The photograph of an excitable crowd running, which appeared in the Gleaner the next morning, is in fact from Mandeville. From there, stories began to pop up all over the island, in Montego Bay, in Falmouth, in Ocherius, but it was in the town of towns, Kingston, where, to use an idiom that feels appropriate here, all hell broke loose. If we believe the story to be true, The fleeing court reporters, stenographers, witnesses, and jurors from the Supreme Court building when it was reported that the coffin was seen ascending the steps of the halls of justice could not have helped the day's dockets of cases that was supposed to be gotten through. All over this corporate area, schools had to be suspended, the children sent home, as principals and teachers found themselves ill-equipped to deal with students whose emotions ranged from wildly excited to deathly afraid, neither of which produced docile, compliant pupils ready to engage in the business of chalk and blackboard. At St. Peter Claver Primary School, a young Murnell Byfield gave the most detailed, purportedly first-hand account of the coffin. The Gleaner reports this. The little red-coated Jankro, Byfield said, asked one of the teachers at St. Peter Claver Primary School if she knew John Brown. According to Byfield, the teacher fainted. One wheel of the coffin, she added, ran over a little boy's foot. He also fainted. The little junker said, sorry. Miss Byfield said the coffin appeared and then disappeared. There was many persons, she added, present at the time. Her story was backed up by a student of the Maxfield Park Primary School who described the appearance of the coffin in similar fashion. Mrs. Pearline Reed, the school's principal at the time, who is still alive, and I was trying to get in touch with her, but she's in an old age home. But anyway, Mrs. Pearline Reed, the school's principal at the time, offered a different story. She acknowledged the day of pandemonium at the school. She acknowledged that a large crowd had gathered at the bottom of St. Joseph Road, and that all the students from her school had bolted from their desks and ran to join the crowd. They were trying to catch a glimpse of the rumored coffin. She insists that no such glimpse was caught, and that the fainting teacher was just about as true a story as that of the stricken police officer. Over and over, the story of the Jankro, as if seeking its own legitimacy, tries to attach itself to professions of perceived respectability. The teacher, the police officer, potentially a lawyer or a judge. Principal Reed refuses to give hers and complains only about the disruption. If school principals were having a hard day of it, so too were business owners. In downtown Parade, chaos reigned. Crowds had gathered to the point where business owners, for good reason, feared rioting. They lowered the shutters of their brick and mortar stores when they realized even Bendown Plaza was closed, the vendors gone, assumed into the swelling crowd of curious spectators. The Gleaner reports this. Hundreds of curious persons chased through the streets of downtown Kingston yesterday. For the majority, the object of their chase was both elusive and invisible. With pedal cyclists setting in a hot pace, office clerks and school children rampaged along King Street, Orange Street, Beckford Street, invaded Tivoli Gardens, and then doubled back on their route, all the while searching for a glimpse of the object. This, incidentally, would be the same Tivoli Gardens that would establish itself a mere decade later as Kingston's first garrison community, would establish itself further as a world-recognized center of violence, a Caribbean hub of drug and weapon trafficking that linked the drug cartels of South America to the North American mafia as established in New York and Miami. This same Tivoli Gardens that up until quite recently had made itself inhospitable to the Jamaican state, forbidding through its own authority any police station from establishing itself within its boundaries. This same Tivoli Gardens found itself vulnerable to an invading crowd chasing a duppy coffin. For all its terror and macabre energies, the ghostly spectacle seems to have inspired more merriment and mirth than anything else. There is the one almost certainly apocryphal story of people fleeing the courthouse, but overwhelmingly, reports are of people running towards the coffin, not away from it. In most accounts, what emerges is a sense of the carnivalesque. Bob Marley calls on a host of ghostbusters, the Duppy Conqueror, the Ghost Catcher, and the Bull Bucker, to come out and prove their supernatural skills of exorcism. But in the meantime, The junkers break out in a dance number, skanking away atop the coffin, while down in parade, people are running like a masquerade. You will be forgiven for not paying much attention to that last reference, the masquerade, for thinking the word is there more than anything else for the sake of its rhyme with parade. Except, as the events of that Wednesday unfolded, it really did share many aesthetic similarities with Jamaica's own indigenous performance of the Mass. For here was music and merrymaking. Here was a throng of pedestrians asserting their authority on the roadways, telling all frustrated drivers, not today. Today the road is ours. Here was a parade of the ghostly and the spectacular and the prophetic, a much thinner line between the worlds of the living and the worlds of the dead, between the serious and the unserious. Put plainly, and to use its most locally common name, this was Junkuno. 4. Junkuno dead, long live Junkuno. By the time the 1970s had rolled around, Junkuno in Jamaica, that once vibrant Christmas time masquerade, had long settled into its slow and ongoing death. This death, like Mr. Brown's, had been prophesied. When the Jewish Jamaican artist Belisario had made his now famous sketches of Junkuno during the time of emancipation, it was with the aim of keeping a record of a cultural practice he did not believe would survive. Even then, Belisario saw the signs. It is possible that Junkuno's equivalent in Trinidad had also seen the signs and so took on a very different journey. After emancipation, while former slaves were engaged in a great migration, moving themselves off the plantation and establishing new free villages, the festival itself did its own migration and moved a few months down the calendar, attaching itself instead to the French planters' carnival, a Catholic pre-Lenten celebration that they had been previously forbidden to participate in. This then was a masquerade of a masquerade, Junkuno wearing a mask, a parade parading about as another parade. Errol Hill's The Trinidad Carnival gives a compelling account of the profound re-engineering work that Junkuno did inside Carnival, transforming its entire DNA, turning it into what Hill insists is an indigenous product of the Caribbean. Some of the innovations were particularly interesting. For instance, what had been meant as a source of intimidation, the brazen Negroes had taken as a source of inspiration. The planters were naturally wary of the free time slaves would enjoy over the Christmas period. The relaxed atmosphere and the increased opportunities for congregation had led to more than one Christmas rebellion. But the French planters had come up with a solution. On Christmas Eve, military law was routinely declared. An ominous red flag was hoisted from the assembly building, and the full force of the colonial militia was displayed in a parade of troops, marching smartly in their uniforms and, quite frankly, thrilling the crowds with their carefully executed maneuvers. The slaves could not help but be moved by the lively and festive nature of these displays and welcomed it yearly as the grand ceremony that officially opened the holiday period. They went further. After emancipation, this aesthetic would be incorporated into their own performance of the masquerade. Instead of just being a parade of a few traditional characters, the carnival would henceforth roll out as its own version of a military parade, band following band following band, each section dressed smartly in their own matching costumes. The parade would be a display of individual characters but also of community. Trinidad was making a mass for the masses. Innovation aside, elites did not take kindly to this hostile takeover. For the next 100 years or so, just as the Jamaican Junkuno was being brutally attacked by the most hostile editorials in the Jamaica Gleaner, so too was the Trinidad Carnival being was the Trinidad Carnival being assaulted by opinion pieces in the Trinidad Guardian. Both festivals were condemned for their general ugliness, their loudness, their lack of discipline, their lack of clothes, and the orgiastic display, their lack of artistic refinement, not to mention all of the festival's Afrocentric or pagan elements seen now through the eyes of a thoroughly Christianized Caribbean, opened it to the charge of demonism or Satanism. A traditional character shared by both masquerades, after all, is the devil. On the surface, there is little difference between the scolding articles to be found in the Gleaner as opposed to the ones to be found in the Guardian. They could almost seem interchangeable, but there was a difference. The sense amongst Jamaican elites was clear. They could do without Jankuno. It needed to die yesterday. It was nothing but an outdated cultural practice that had no place in the island's modernity, nor, quite frankly, in its morality. This was not quite the case in Trinidad. Elites there felt that carnival still belonged to them, and present depravity aside, the event could still be rescued and restored, could still be rescued from its worst populist elements and be restored to its former glory. It is worth noting that though the elites may have changed, and as well the idea of what constitutes carnival glory days, the preceding sentence is still descriptive of the Trinidad carnival and the cultural attitudes that surround it. Jamaican elites had no nostalgic connection to the Jankuno. The masquerade had never expanded its base to encourage broader participation, and certainly not theirs. For those who did participate, it remained a mark of their poverty. By the 70s, the festival had devolved into little more than a Christmas time hustle, a costume of buffoonery some near-destitute person would wear during the holiday season, hoping this act would be rewarded with coins. It grew tiresome. The island's lawmakers had also worked to defang the thing almost literally. The more frightening characters like Horsehead and Cowhead were deemed completely inappropriate, enough to warrant them being outlawed. Scorned by the militant Pentecostal culture that surrounded it, ignored and unrewarded by patrons, looked down upon with either embarrassment or condescension by the crowds it still tried to thrill, Jankuno eventually stopped trying. Belisario was right. The festival would not survive emancipation. And yet, take a closer look, and one will find ways in which the Jamaican Jankuno was just as cunning as the Trinidad Carnival, ways in which it too had hid itself, disappearing for a moment, changing its name and its last known address, and then reappearing with a whole new name, a whole new costume, but dancing the same old dance. And were you to take that second look, remove the mask from the thing, and recognize it again, were you to whisper once more its true name, Jankuno, it would put a finger to its lips and whisper, shh. For instance, Jankuno had always been about theatrical performances. Where the masquerade stopped along its route, there a whole skit would unfold, often carrying titles like Richard III or Hamlet. The planter class who first documented these performances could not detect anything Shakespearean about them outside of their lofty titles. They found them lewd, over the top, full of crass humor and improbable storylines. If this was Shakespeare, it was Shakespeare as narrated by Anansi. Here, we see the beginnings of Jamaican roots theater. Jankuno lives. The male performers in Jankuno were known eponymously as the John Canoes. The women who accompanied them were the set girls, and for a time they had pushed the John Canoes into the role of opening act and remade Jankuno in their own image, which effectively was a pageant competition between mulatto girls on the island. Rivalry was strong between the estates, and even Missus got involved. If the girls from her own stock did well, it reflected on her. She trained her mulattoes in poise and grace, outfitted them with lavish gowns so they could thrill the crowd with their manners, their style, and their exotic blends of African and European features. If you hear in this a suspicious description of the Miss Jamaica World and Universe pageants, then shh, Jankuno lives. It is the masquerade that has died, and the day of outrageousness and exaggeration that accommodated it. That day of pure and unadulterated stupidness. That day that paused all the narrative conventions of Western man and allowed folklore to intrude. That day that took the business of unseriousness seriously. The day that you could almost believe couldn't really have happened except you had lived it. That is what had died. Except had it really? Days such as October 28, 1970 suggest something else. That even though the parade has fallen away from Jamaican culture as a regular or reliable event, that it's potentially still there, alive in the culture, alert for the opportunity that might present itself just so on an ordinary morning. And so that hearing the news, And so that hearing the news that an officer who opened fire on a Jankro had been admitted to hospital, or else hearing that accidental reggae singer Cliff Twang's tune, Nobody Can Cross It, had officially reached to #1 on the Billboard reggae charts, or else hearing that at his own sorrowful homegoing service, it was announced over his coffin that Dingy Gana Hell head first, that on such days you might pause, take a second look, remove the mask from the thing and recognize it again. You might even whisper its true name saying, Jankuno, I see you. A little more. 2 small sections. This is one of those other kind of, it's outside the narrative, a place above the story. Theatrically breathless and purring apologies, the letter J arrives late. By late, I mean last. The final letter, a late 16th century addition to the Latin alphabet. But exactly what sound work it would do was a decision for each language to make. Deciding each one of them which letter would be relieved from the double or sometimes triple duty it had been carrying out. In Spanish, it was determined that it was X, it was the letter X that had finally earned some form of rest. Its sound duties had included the Z sound, the voiced alveolar fricative, the sibilant sound of S, the consonant clusters KS as in box, or GZ as in exam, and as well the sound of aspiration, so to speak, the voiceless glottal fricative, H. It is this final sound which the Spanish decided should now be taken over by the late arriving J. The island to the south of Cuba had been called Jamaica by its native people, but they had had no written language to render this sound. In the 15th century, it was the Spanish who gave the island its first orthographic representation, originally spelled with an X to render that breathy beginning. But by the time the 17th century had rolled around, X had earned its sabbatical and J had been brought in to shoulder some of the work. Now, Jamaica, the spelling had changed, but the pronunciation had remained the same. The British, however, would do the opposite, keep the spelling, but change the pronunciation. And so it is, the letter J arrives late, but perhaps just in time to pronounce Jamaica and Jankro and Jankuno. 5, the Jankro's benediction. Here now is part of the story you would not have heard before. As the crowd makes its second turn up Orange Street, a young man, 22 or maybe 23, finds himself suddenly several paces ahead of the group, like the king of the band, or like actor boy in Junkanoo. All this excitement, none of it had been on the young man's cards for that day. His navy blue trousers are smart in style, but are presently soiled with grease stains. It seems to be half of some kind of uniform. The shirt that would complete the set would probably have his surname stitched onto the left pocket, but he's wearing no such shirt right now. Over his thin torso is stretched a simple white merino. It is as if he had gotten home from work, had only half undressed before being sent out again. It would have been an aunt, no, a great aunt, an unsmiling woman with whom he now lived in Kingston, and with a name incongruous to her character, like Aunt Sweetie. It would have been such a woman who had commissioned him on this duty. She would have heard him enter, and without lifting herself from whatever duty absorbed her in that moment, the shelling of gungo peas, the reading of a Bible passage, would have bellowed out her command, "Go on back out and get one loaf of bread. See the money there and the whatnot." He would have left without complaint, but was not so committed to this duty that he would have been able to resist the festive distraction that he happened upon, a crowd running in search of a supernatural coffin. So it was, he was absorbed into the excitement. Now, back on Orange Street, the first wave of runners are flagging a bit, and the young man finds himself in front. It is a strange feeling. He does not look back, but senses what feels like an entire island behind him. It is as if this is his true duty, not to buy bread, but to pull his people along to where they want to go. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eyes, he sees the wooden corner of an object disappearing around Charles Street. A part of him knows that it is probably not the coffin, that it could be anything, a box, a dresser, a small table being hauled somewhere. None of these would be incredible sights to see on the city streets. But he still cries out, "See it there, see it there." And with renewed energy, he sprints even faster towards it, every part of his being beckoning the crowd, "Come, come." Running at such speed, he skids cartoon-like onto Charles Street. He barely has time to correct himself, to settle back into a stride, when he freezes completely. The runners who are almost at his heels come to an abrupt stop as well. And then behind them, and behind them, and behind them, everyone coming to a stop. Further back, some begin to form syllables of complaint, but the words are swallowed when they look up and a cold kernel of fear spreads throughout the crowd. Who had expected to actually see the coffin? And yet, here it is, a simple plywood box held in a three-wheeled gurney, and atop it 3 jonquils, their backs turned to the crowd. The coffin too has come to a standstill. As if choreographed, all 3 jonquils turn and face their chasers. As the back of the coffin is now the front and the front is now the back, the smallest of the vultures must make her way from one end to the other. She does this slowly. She does this slowly, her pebbled eyes seeming to take each person in. Finally, the bird spreads her great black wings and clears her throat. How will they answer the jonquil's riddle? What will they say when she asks, "Has anyone seen Mr. Brown?" But this is not what the jonquil says. In fact, the jonquil has no question to ask. Instead, what the jonquil says is this: ashes to ashes, dust to dust. From story you have come, and to story you shall return. Jack Mandora, me not choose none. Sure.
Right, so Jamaica, John Canoe, and John Crow. A lot for us to ponder in terms of the way in which we weave and we deal with what we considered folklore or Duppy stories and Anansi stories and history and myth. So Kai, I know, is open for questions. And I just have one question I want to ask, and then I'm going to open it to whoever wants to. There's so much to think about in terms of what you've said. But I think I have three questions, but I'm only going to ask one, which has nothing to do with what you talk about, but I think everything to do with what you've just talked about. The whole issue of place, which is so critical in your work and central to your work. So you grew up in Jamaica and you've lived in the UK and now you live in Florida, which some of us call the second Jamaica. And I'm just curious to know, how have those three geographies, Jamaica, England, and the US, shaped not just what you write, but how you write? So specifically in terms of this project that you're currently working on.
I was fascinated with place at some point. Obviously, Augustown, the cartographer tries to map way to Zion. It is weirdly not my center now. It's not the center where this project comes from. And it's probably there. I mean, probably if I thought about it, but I think I would be forcing it to try to put place in, even though the project obviously happens in place. I think overall, my fascination now, this is me going back to Sylvia Winter. If you hear all the references, John Canoe, the Jamaican national heroes, the human, and how is the human constructed, it is clear that I am talking with Sylvia. And for some reason, that has become that is the center of this project. How do humans tell stories? Why do we tell stories? And how do we live inside the stories that we tell? How do stories shape reality? I think that is the heart of this project, and which is a strange thing, because you're usually so comfortable being from the Caribbean and articulating yourself as, like a fundamentally Caribbean person or a black person. And I think the human is a much more interesting center, and it's a much more complicated center, and the work is coming out of that. And the masquerade then as a place. If we go back to lambing, here is where the humans met. Here's where the world met. The world met here. To think of the masquerade as another way of coming together, another project of how do you mix all of this? That is interesting to me, and the work is kind of spilling out of those kinds of thoughts.
All right, so good. It's a pleasure to be here and to hear you talk. I really like the language and the imagery in what you presented. You did a thing a couple times in there that made me feel like it's film. Like you were zooming in and zooming out, like you like enter the scene. I want you to talk a little bit about that. I've seen that technique somewhere else where it's almost like you're experiencing the narrative as though you are watching a film. And that's what I felt like you were doing. And I want you to kind of talk about the process of creating that. Because I liked it a lot.
Oh, yes, that is.
I don't know what it's called. There might be a term for it.
I'm sure there is, but I think the moment that I thought in my head that I want this to unfold like a documentary, and because I love documentaries, I love these just kind of vignette snapshots that it doesn't always tell you what the connections are, but after all the vignettes build up, you begin to see it. And so much of the material I'm reading is so theoretical at times, and so thick, and so much kind of history that you have to plow through, that even me writing it, I thought, Jesus, that is boring. I thought, how can I live through this as a story? How can I extract from these little moments? And so I don't think I've articulated it as a technique. Yeah, well, I know when I move to the place where it really just becomes abstract, the place above the story, that is always me purposefully. I am going to zoom out and not get involved and tell you something, observe the human just from above. But I don't think we would enjoy being in that space too long. And so I just wanted access to that kind of abstract reasoning, and then I would enter into the story again. And hopefully that illuminates other aspects of the story as it goes on. That's the hope.
Afterwards, I'm going to talk to you about a book that I read that had that technique as a narrative structure.
Okay.
And see if it's something that you'd enjoy reading.
Yeah, man, thanks. And I think Jeanette.
Yes, thank you. Hello, Kai. Really enjoyed this talk. Why didn't you mention dance hall in talking about masquerade and junkanoo?
Jeanette, look how long that was already. Yeah, I mean, add more. But I'll think about that. I mean, it honestly, it didn't. It's such an obvious connection, right? But no, it didn't occur to me. There's so many incidents, there's so many moments that I'm trying to gather together from contemporary culture and from kind of Jamaicans. Again, just doing that day of extravagance that we do. And so there's so many moments that are kind of adjacent to dancehall that are happening. So dancehall does come up in the project. Probably not for this first chapter. For this first chapter, I wanted a weird kind of entry into thinking about how other things can be junkanoo, even though we think that festival died. Like, it obviously, things don't die like that. They transform, they turn into something else. And so I more wanted to establish that. And you're right, probably dancehall is a part of that transformation.
I think it's worth a look. I think it's worth a look, and I think, yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Lovely to have you.
Thank you.
I noticed in your presentation that it was well researched. It had Gleaner sources, it had historical sources. How important as a writer of fiction is research to you? How does it inform or inspire you when you research? Is it something that you look for inspiration from?
I mean, I do, right? I'm trying not to overstate this because, things mean different things to different people. For myself, I got very lucky. Like let's just speak plainly. In my introduction, they said the kind of embarrassing truth that everybody knows. I came to this department, to Literature in English, and I dropped out. And then I ended up, it always felt to me that it was accidental, right, that I ended up back in academia. It always felt almost fraudulent, right? Like I ended up doing a PhD because I was so deep down embarrassed that I had dropped out. And I felt if I do a PhD and I have doctor behind my name, nobody will ask me about that again. And so when you look at my name, it is MA, PhD, nobody says, where's the BA? It does not exist. But at some point, I realized why I'm being careful about this is because I do not think this is true for all writers, many writers. Many writers end up in the academy because it's a steady income. It's easy. If you write enough books, you can get a work there. But I need to be in the academy. Like I take that job I almost see it as spiritual. I don't believe the point of the academy or what this space does is even to teach. Teaching is something that we do to make ourselves relevant, that makes it legible to a kind of capitalistic world. But the point of the academy is there is intellectual content in this world, and that content must be protected and that content must be grown. And that is my job. And I do take that job very seriously, that where there is content, I will protect it. And therefore, I don't want to talk around it. I don't want to pretend it is this or pretend it is that. If there's any place where you can take the work seriously, what happened? What happened in this moment? How do we understand this moment? Not because I want this moment to mean this, but what happened? Why did it happen? How did it happen like that? And I feel like I just take pleasure in thinking through things and going back to the archive and figuring out, oh my God, I didn't realize it happened. Because you hear so many stories, and as a person who loves stories and is involved in writing stories, you can go so many places with that. And then the moment that you say settle and figure out what actually occurred, I always find those moments illuminating and fascinating and so much more layered and complex than the kind of silly stories that we tell around it are. And so for me, going into the archives, going into history, going into doing that kind of very careful research is for my project fundamentally important, but I do not pretend it is important for all writers or that it's something that everyone should do. It is about the project that I've been working on now. So yes, it is important to me, but right where you are, right? All right, we're going there, but well, why am I looking? You?
Hi, Kai. One of the things that struck me in your lecture was the way in which the fiction of a fictional story feels real, and a real story feels as though it should be fiction. So George Williams's story should really only be fiction.
Right.
And the story of the coffin seemed very real. And I remember that day when I was in high school in St. Hugh's, down at the bottom field, under a lignum vitae tree, lunchtime, eating my patty, and suddenly everybody was running and running and running. And it was to see the coffin, Yeah, the junker and the coffin. So I don't know if you could say something about, when stories are real or not real and feel real or shouldn't be real, etc. Something like that.
Yeah, that is funny. We should talk after, by the way. I do remember thinking about magic realism in that way, right? Like when magic realism is fantastic, it is because you found a way to make very ordinary thing. Like on one hand, you have spectacular things that seem everyday. The man just walk out of his office and him jump on him flying carpet and him go home, and everybody treat it like it's normal. But then you have the moment like in Gabriel Garcia Marquez when he finds ice for the first time, and the detail of him hearing about the ice and approaching the ice, and all of a sudden you are caught up in that excitement, like you are thinking, my God, he is going to see ice. And how did he do that? How did he make me that excited that it was as if I didn't know ice before? I think I've always been interested in just that as a technique. How do you again make ordinary things seem magical and magical things seem ordinary? And I think that comes from thinking about magic realism in that kind of early days. But just stories as a whole, though, at the heart of this project, it is, I think what I'm coming to is, when did humans start speaking? And when did we start narrating? And how did we develop all these technologies of narrative? And these technologies are amazing because we employ them all the time. And it is not only that we make things feel real, it is that we do make things real. Like so much of what is constructed around us are all coming from story. We story this world in so many amazing ways that is what I'm trying to get to here, that story becomes physical with the human. And we don't recognize building and office and town. So it's not this chapter, but to think of nation as a work of fiction. Of course, land is true. And when I say fiction in that way, I'm thinking of Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens, where he just gives such a great definition of it. And he thinks that fiction is what does not exist in the natural world. Fiction is that which only exists because of the shared agreement by humans, that without our agreement, the thing does not exist. So like money, the economy, law, human rights, all of these things that we have spoken into being, I think it's just such a much broader, more interesting thought of what is fiction and what is story. And I think in those instances, you can make story real all the time because that is what humans do. We make stories physical. At the smallest chance we get, we say, let it be, and it is. Fascinating. Yeah.
So I know we have a lot of questions, but I think we're going to do two more. So over there.
Two questions, if I'm allowed.
You're boiling?
My hand was up long time. So the first one is an easy one. I found it interesting that you said you were earlier interested in place and you mentioned August Tone. And now you are so moved and interested in winter. And I find that interesting because I found August Tone as a conversation. For me, when I read it, I found it was a conversation with Hills of Hebron.
Oh, yeah, so many people have said that. Huh?
So I wanted to know if that had been a deliberate echo on your part. It wasn't, see?
No, I mean, I think I found, I mean, obviously I've always known Winter. I fell in love with her too late because it amazed me. I mean, Winter is not easy.
She's not.
It is, and so it almost felt like by accident that suddenly something turned on and I got what she was saying, and then it was, oh my God, why have I not just immersed myself in talking with this woman? So no, that was accidental.
Okay, awesome. And then the second one is, and I know how you're talking about the myth of the coffin and the jonko in this, and I've noted that a few of your newer pieces of poetry have looked at historical happenings that have almost been mythologized now. You said, I think it was the death of Rex Nettleford. Am I getting the right person? And then there's the one with the fire. Just the largeness of the way you paint the story captures the magnitude of the story, but raises it to an almost mythical level. So I'm curious for you to talk about how this aspect of myth in your non-fiction reflects on, if at all, your exploration of history in an almost mythical way in your poetry, if that makes sense at all.
I don't know, but I'll talk a little about what the poems are. Because it's a Brathwaite poem, but all the poems are elegies, and I think that does come from partly from thinking about that Brathwaite poem and thinking about Brathwaite. And in his last book, which is, I don't know, heartbreaking to me, there's so much pain, and I think clearly something is off. I don't know how to say it, and he's like, nothing's wrong with my mind, nothing's wrong with my mind. And he has this line that the more I know I die, the more you know I dead. And I lay prostrate in this chattel bed, And because I cannot sleep at night, you fill my dreams with ghosts and demons and the longest dead, which is the name of the collection, On Ghosts and Demons and the Longest Dead. And I guess that becomes part of my imagination of, so I think it is that mythologizing of how do we sing these people. And for me that becomes, yes, sometimes it is a woman who died in that fire, but it is that generation of Caribbean writers that I am so eternally grateful to. That we are losing so many of them, and that becomes the heart of that collection, that I want to sing you people because, and I want to give you the kind, that's why I think it's the elegiac. That's why it's rising into that kind of mythology.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You are a wonderful storyteller, and not everyone can tell stories as convincingly as you do. My question is about Kai the person. What are the early influences that would have shaped your storytelling interest, patterns, and rhythm?
Why you must ask that? You see, half this audience is my family. And all of them are leaning in now, what you're going to say. I don't know. It's so many little things. I think my mother was a great storyteller, at least humorous. I really value humor. That no matter how serious the topic is, there has to be an element of laughter, which is why I love The Masquerade. I think The Masquerade is this perfect blend of being very serious but smiling at it and going that this life is theater. Like there's a way to understand it in a different way. So I think, I also know that from very early I was writing. I didn't know what I wanted to write. Some of these things are simple, and we all kind of make up stories about how we became a writer. One time I used to say, my grandfathers are, and one grandfather was a writer, the other grandfather was a preacher, and they meet inside me. That's such a great story, but we're just making things up to explain things, right? I mean, like we don't really know how we became different things. So probably that is part of the influence, probably is part of me reading so much. My sister here used to make me read. Not she used to make me read, she did not make me read anything. But somehow there are all these Sidney Sheldon books in the house. And that, to me, that was the greatest writer in the world for years. I loved the complexity of these plots. I think somehow very early I just, like so many of us, not only did I love stories, at some point I thought I could create these stories. And again, this could be a very accidental thing. My father, bless him, one day brought a computer to the house. And there was something magical about that. Not only could I think about a story, but I could type it up. And typing it up made it look as if it was a book. That was magic. I mean, there are people who actually write things. I've never done that. Writing for me happened when the computer came because it looked like a book. Like, I could press print and it come out of this machine and it looked like the pages of a book. Magic! And suddenly you thought, I could be a writer. So I don't know if I could tell you like a very convincing story of, I could, but I no longer am sure about those stories. I think sometimes, boy, Kai, you told that story really, really well, but is that really what happened? And these days it's really important to me to admit the uncertainty about things. Like, I can tell you why I think this happened. I know I became a writer and it became very fulfilling, but I cannot tell you definitively how I was formed. But there are little things that happened that clearly pushed me in that direction. Thank you. But thank you all so much for coming out.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lisa so she can close out. And I know you have other questions, and you'll have an opportunity another time.
All right, so firstly, I just want to get us out of here, so I'll do this very quickly. So I want to thank the audience for joining us. It is not through art and critique, or else not only through art and the critique that we are kept together, but through the work of what we saw tonight, Generations, who's carrying on Prof. Baugh's spirit and legacy and keeping it alive, and also just having you here to celebrate with us, and his contemporaries that we've heard mentioned through Kai, and the work that continues to move us. Next, I want to have a big, big, big thanks to Kai Miller for, for coming here and accepting our invitation. Thank you very much. Kai Miller, who continues to redefine what it means to be literary and also musical, because I did not expect to hear about Baby Yui and the babysitters tonight at all. I couldn't tell the last time I even heard his name mentioned, so thank you. And many thanks to talented Letitia Wilcox for sharing her work with us. I just want to quickly mention Letitia's work as a writer. Her book, she was being very modest, but it's not only a collection of poetry, but she also have her paintings in her book that speaks to her work. So if you get a chance, I don't remember the name, Letitia, but my apologies, but if you get a chance to look at the book, and you could also purchase the paintings, I've had the opportunity to do so. And I also want to thank our host, not mistress of ceremony, because that's not going to work tonight, or master of ceremony, but our host, Professor Opal Palmer-Adisa. And then thank you for your time, always here for us, and your voice, and for just supporting the department in every way that you can. And I thank you to MITS for their technical support and streaming services, and their hard work in trying to let us hear clearly. I don't even know where they are, but they were really trying. You saw them sneaking around? Yeah, so we want to thank you guys for that very much. And finally, thanks to the DLA, the Department of Literatures and English staff, who played a key role in putting this all together. And I just want to make special mention to the administrative staff, who's always the behind the scene, getting things done, sending out invitation, making all of this possible. So to Antoinette, where's Antoinette? They always hide when it's time to call their names. So Antoinette and Venice, who's hiding, I know they deliberately sneaked out. And I see Whitney, who's also hiding, who was very helpful in the pretty flyers and putting together the program. And Whitney is also now a full-time lecturer with the department. So I want to thank you guys. And also, yes, she's trying to hide. And I also just want to thank Tonya Brown, who's also hiding. They just love to hide. Research assistant who was, where is she? Hiding. Hiding up there, who was also very helpful for this evening. And before we say goodnight, I think it's only appropriate that I ask, not that I'm too old for this, because you can see I'm young, right? But I want to ask Whitney Eaton, who is a former student of Kai Miller. So I think it's only appropriate to ask Whitney to come up, please, to present Kai with a gift. And after the presentation of the gift, I'm going to invite everyone. Again, it's only appropriate to have soup. We have soup, vegetable soup for you. Yes, it's not raining, but it's a rainy season. Yeah. So, I thought it would be nice to have soup and fruit juices. So that is in N4. Where? N3, next door. So after the gift presentation. So have a great night, and thank you for coming out. Where are the pictures? Huh? Yes, of course. You're not going to show us your gift? No. All right, have a good night, everyone.